I'm Andy Wright. I'm a director at Black Arch Partners in town, and I'm an ACG board member, past president of our ACG Charlotte chapter. Black Arch is a middle market investment bank based here in Charlotte. We are first and foremost process experts in M&A, both sell side and buy side, but we're also industry experts across a number of core sectors. We focus on companies that are sponsor-backed as well as family founder-owned that typically are about 15 to 50 million in EBITDA. I'll be moderating today's discussion, and we do want to make this interactive. So please, if we're discussing a topic that's of interest that you have a question about as we go through the topics, don't hesitate to raise your hand. We'll call on you and just address your question then. We hope to be able to leave time at the end for Q&A as well, but we want to make it as interactive as possible throughout. So before we dive into a number of topics, let me let the panelists introduce themselves. Mark, why don't we start with you and we'll just go down the row here.
Good, thanks Andy. Good morning, Mark Miller. I'm a partner at Forvis Mazars. I started my career as an industrial engineer doing process re-engineering for corporate clients as part of Arthur Andersen in Atlanta. When Andersen became history, about the time I made partner, I joined Alvarez & Marsal and started a business consulting group for that firm and focused on private equity clients and merger integration. And I did some time working with Vista Equity Partners as a chief operating officer in a couple portfolio companies there, working on value creation, roll-ups, et cetera. And then a few years back, I joined what was then Dixon Hughes Goodman as a partner leading the private equity value creation practice. And we've built that up and since become Forvis and now Forvis Mazars. And so I lead a team focused on the private equity market, mostly on post-close value creation.
I'm Dag Desarian. I'm the CEO of Intrepid Investment Bankers. We are based in Los Angeles. We started, my partners, 6 partners and I started the firm in 2010. We are a national middle market investment bank. I started in the M&A business in 1989, helping build another firm called Barrington Associates, which we sold to Wells Fargo Securities. And 2 years after we sold, Wells acquired Wachovia. And we got acquainted to all the folks here in Charlotte at the time, and we continued building the business. And in 2010, we left Wells and we started Intrepid, our current firm. And in 2019, we were acquired by MUFG, Mitsubishi United Financial Group, which is the largest bank in Japan, 7th largest bank worldwide. And today we operate as their advisory arm in North America. And we have approximately 90 bankers in offices in Charlotte, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, and San Francisco.
Morning, my name is Brett Hubler. I'm a partner at Troutman Pepper. We're a law firm with offices across the nation. We merged in 2020, 2 firms, Troutman Sanders and Pepper Hamilton, to create a 1,200 lawyer law firm. And in January, we'll merge with Locke Lord to have a 1,600 person law firm, making us a top 20 size in the US as far as number of people headcount wise. Our corporate group focuses primarily on the M&A transactions and strategic or private equity. My practice is a mix of strategic and private equity deal work, and platform add-ons, carve-outs, anything you can think of. So good to be here, and it's been a good number of years every year to do this with the group and to see everybody, familiar faces.
Hi, my name is Trey Fletcher. I am the CFO for Crete United. We are a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing company focused on energy efficiency and what we refer to as the built environment. We are focused in the commercial and industrial sector of the industry. We are owned by Ridgemont Equity Partners here, so portfolio company operating. We have done 47 acquisitions in 4 years. We average 8 to 12 acquisitions a year, somewhere in that ballpark. We are fully integrated, so we have done all 47 partners of ours are 100% integrated into our portfolio. We do it in about 100 days, and I own pretty much all of the back end of the company, from finance, accounting, HR, IT, integration, so on and so forth. So looking forward to a good conversation.
Hey everybody, I'm Ashton Belk and I'm the president of Huebner Marketing. So we're a firm based out of Denver, Colorado. We primarily focus on brand communications or brand strategy and communications. So we work with companies from anywhere from manufacturing to multi-brand companies and then really across the deal flow. So we have different tactical approaches that we set out to do based off of where you're at and where we can problem solve. So that's really where this panel has become, it's a great topic for us because where our innovation really comes from is through our partnerships. We look at what the needs are, we find any holes or problems that they bring to us, and then we look to be able to find ways to be able to have creative solutions around them.
Well, thanks everyone, and thanks for joining this morning. Mark, why don't we begin our discussion with you, and if you could just talk about from a value creation perspective, what you and your team focus on and how you really help your clients maximize performance and create value.
I'll start with a story. A few years back, I looked at a SIM for a company. I was at Vista at the time that was in the market, and it was a software company, had 7 products that they had acquired and some they had built, and it had nice revenue trends and some pro forma assumptions about a good EBITDA performance. And then at the end it said, and we think we have about $2 million in unrealized synergies available to the buyer. And I thought, well, this is perfect, right? Unrealized synergies, meaning I've got a management team that for whatever reason never got around to it. And so, frankly, that's my passion, is how do we find and execute on those $2 million of unrealized synergies before we go to sell the company. And unlike maybe a traditional corporate focused business consulting firm that's very functional focused, right? I'm an Oracle expert, I'm an HR expert, I'm a supply chain expert. In PE, we need to move fast and we need to be able to adjust to the priorities of that portfolio company. And so our focus is really being strong project managers first, helping clients articulate and understand based on the vision of where we want to go, what are the 5, 6, 7, 12 things that are going to keep us from realizing those $2 million in unrealized synergies. And that could be anything, right? It could be we got to rationalize SKUs. We've got to take advantage of better HR systems. We need to re-engineer the shop floor. We need to upgrade our ERP. We need to make sure the data in our ERP is the same as the data in our CRM. There's just a host of things, and a lot of times the difference between achieving full value and falling short is 100 small things. And so our goal is to create a team that works side by side with management to roll up their sleeves, articulate what those things are, and lay out a roadmap to get there. Now, we are organized. We're not all utility players. Our clients typically ask us for things in 3 key areas. One is call it finance professionalization. So new platform, getting them from cash to GAAP, getting to a monthly close, going from a maybe a spreadsheet and QuickBooks environment to something more sophisticated, more scalable. And that leads me to the second key area, which is ERP. And so we focus on relationships with the ERP solutions that serve the middle market. And we understand, at least at a functional user level, how those can be deployed within the organization, the training that comes around it, and the requirements process that we want to go through. And then lastly, we have a lot of folks that are focused simply on the roll-up. How do we help clients integrate acquisitions, and how do we help them get better at implementing acquisitions or integrating acquisitions in the future? And then within that is all the things you're going to address: supply chain, shop floor, HR, And if we don't have those capabilities in-house, we'll help you find a partner that does and make them part of the project team and part of the transformation plan.
And Trey, maybe building on that, as an operator, what are some of the key tools and strategies that you all use at Crete to create value both for the larger platform, but then also as you continue to integrate new add-ons?
Yeah, when we're looking at acquisitions, our focus is primarily, outside of you get past the industry and kind of what we're doing is, we're looking specifically at kind of the owner-operator model and how much they're involved with the business. What does their top line look like? What is their growth strategy? How do they think about growth strategy? We understand kind of where our strategic pillar is and what value we can bring back to them, being a lot of the integration side, teaching them some of the back end, understanding how to do a lot of the integration, the systems, stuff of that nature that we can ultimately help to create value. But what we need and what we focus on specifically is does the owner know how to maneuver within their industry? Can they continue to expand? Do they have a growth platform that they are already thinking about? Is it an M&A or a tuck-in focused strategy? Or is it all organic? Is this something that we're going to have to add on to? These are all areas that we start to vet very specifically. How well do they operate their company? Are they cash flow, can they manage their cash flow as part of it? Do they need additional assistance on that? Where exactly do they need support? And our focus is really about understanding kind of how they do that and where they're at specifically in kind of their life cycle, and then adding on to that whether we need to supplement in different areas across the board.
That's great. And Ed, as an investment banker, CEO of Intrepid, your firm, talk a little bit about positioning and the importance of positioning and helping your clients think about positioning their company both before a sale and then through a sale process.
So, Andy, I think preparing the company and our client for the process, and specifically spending time on positioning, is one of the most important value drivers in the whole process. So before we get started, we challenge our clients to think about the vision of their business. What is that business going to look like 5 years from now to compel buyers today to pay an outsized multiple? If that owner-entrepreneur cannot define that business, then they're not ready to go to market. So we challenge them. We talk to them about what are the value drivers that motivate buyers to pay an outsized multiple, which are really the growth of the business, the business model of the business, the profitability, and the risk parameters. So in each one of those buckets, there are lots of things that do that, right? So we ask them to really articulate how this business can be a lot more in the future than it is today. A good friend of mine was the head of acquisitions for a Fortune 500 company, and I asked him one day, I said, listen, what are you looking for in a target? And he says, like, one of the basic questions I ask is, if that business shut down today, will anybody miss it? Will your clients miss you? Yeah. Who knows you're gone? Or they go like, whatever, I can go to 5 other competitors and do the same thing. And that's a very profound question when you think about it. And we ask people to define their businesses and then define the roadmap to get to that vision that is bigger and better than what the company is today. And I'll give you a simple example. A few years ago, we were selling a company that provided equipment and supplies to professional tattoo artists. I didn't even know there was such an industry, right? Think about that. And we learned funny things in our business. And the challenge with that is an incredibly profitable business. They had identified a number of acquisition targets that they wanted to grow through acquisitions. The biggest problem with that business was that it's a rather limited industry. Right? There are only so many tattoo artists in this country, right? That you can only sell them so much product. So the challenge, what we gave them was like, what other markets? Don't think about yourself as a equipment and supplier, a product supplier to the tattoo industry. What are the common characteristics that you can define to enter other markets? And if you don't think about the tattoo industry and just say, what are they selling and who are they selling it to? They're selling essential components to a professional audience that was serving a consumer that was very much for a passion-driven enthusiast end market. So if you take a step back and say what other markets are like that, you can define pet grooming. So pet groomers buy professional equipment to groom pets, and pets are a passion and enthusiast part of the market. So they defined that. They went after that market, and not only did we get a great multiple for that, But 4 years later, through add-on acquisitions, they had defined a massive market. That was probably the best investment that private equity firm ever made. So you just have to challenge the owners in defining that business as bigger and better than what it is today, and then give them the roadmap to show the buyers how they're going to get there. It's got to be real. You can't just talk about it. You just got to make it happen.
Always helpful to think about adjacencies, right, and ways to expand the addressable market. Yeah. So Ashton, positioning is something where your firm really helps create value. Talk a little bit about how you think about brand equity and creating value through brand equity and positioning, and how your company helps with that.
Sure. Well, to Ed's point, I mean, we have a lot of synergies in the way that we kind of attack brands. But first off, when we're talking about brand equity, it's really, as you were talking about, it's the reason that people choose to do business with you at the end of the day. So why do they care? Why do they choose you over their competition? But for our firm, we really focus on, and the heart of our business is the brand position. So making sure that we're optimizing brands to be able to go to market with strength. We have a process that we call doing the relevancy roadmap, or a relevancy report to start off with, which is really a positioning report. And what we do is we go through and we meet with stakeholders at every phase. So executives from the internal company, we meet with customers, we meet with employees. If it's manufacturing, we walk the manufacturing floor. We talk about why they care so much about, the way that they bend the metal. It all matters. But we're really looking for any of those differentiators that are going to be able to set the business apart. So what makes them unique or different, and what problem are they really solving for their end consumer? So we work with the stakeholder interviews. We go into really doing a messaging audit too. So one of the biggest pieces there is you have these things that you say about yourself internally, or what you want to be known for, but the big shift is that may not actually be what is happening outside. So how people talk about you outside, what you say about yourself inside, where's the gap? So we look at a gap analysis. We break down where the messaging is, where the narrative is, where you actually want to drive the narrative to, and be able to craft a communications plan that's able to accelerate your position in the market. So we take that, we do a value index. We were able to figure out what message really would resonate the best in the market, and where that hole is that you really can fit into. So based off of that competitive analysis, then we look at, okay, so we have this position that we think would be your best go-to-market strategy, and create a marketing roadmap to support it. So then we go into execution mode and bring in our creative team that goes in and actually takes you to market with that specific position in mind with strength. So that's really our process of what we go through. One of our clients came to us as an example of it, who had what he considered a bag of parts. It was a PE-backed company, and he had been given, 6 to 7 companies in the last couple of years. And he was like, okay, so I have a bag of parts. I don't know how they should all operate together. We have all of these opportunities. They all serve each other in some capacity, but the equity isn't there. We could be selling more than we are. So we went through and we did the report with him and with their company, and found that really what they needed was to be able to push their brand equity up. So we created a holding company that was able to really focus on all of the aspects of the other companies. So they all pushed into overarching company that then had 2 different divisions, and all of these divisions were able to then speak to one another better. They had an underlying narrative that told a bigger story and gave them power against their individual companies. So all of a sudden they had a much richer approach to the market and how they could serve. And they have one was a PPE focused wing, and the other was an environmental solutions. So they both helped each other, and they could cross-pollinate much better because of it. And then PE also had the opportunity, based off of that, to sell either individual divisions, or they could sell it as a whole. So really weighing each stakeholder's need of what was created out of that company, and then take it to market to be able to grow it, and then be able to move towards exit.
Always helpful to self-assess a little bit, right? And make sure that what you think the market is seeing is accurate, right? And having a third-party point of view is incredibly helpful in doing that. Maybe switching gears a little bit, Ed, I'll come back to you. On the sell side, can you talk about maybe some ways in which you're using innovative tools to make the process a little more seamless and also to make sure that you're maximizing value as you take companies to market?
Yeah, well, Andy, it's innovation and mergers and acquisitions don't always go together. It's probably one of the most backward industry that I've ever come across. I think the biggest innovation in M&A has been the virtual data room in the last 30 years, or making books shorter and using more graphics and using fewer words. I mean, that's the innovation. I'm being half facetious, but baby steps, right? No, but listen, I think that what we have noticed over the last 3 to 4 decades of deal making is an increased use of third-party advisors and reports to validate what we say about a company. Things like what Ashton said, getting a brand audit done. If you can do that before you take the company to market, if you can have a market study done that validates the growth rate of the business and the tailwinds that drive an industry and the risks, any potential headwinds or regulatory risk. If you're selling a software company, do a code audit before you go to market. If you're selling a heavy regulated industry like healthcare, for example, do a compliance to make sure that your billing codes are appropriate. Whatever you could do to validate how strong the management team is and the operations are so you don't run into problems later in the process. We've seen the industry go in that direction. Now, that has had a little bit of a strange corollary to it in that we've seen private equity become overly reliant on advisors. And I think to some extent that's kind of dumbed down the instincts of the old folks who used to do private equity deals. 20 years ago, we used to see a lot of instinct, people taking risk because they, their noses told them that this is a great business. And I get the consultants are saying this, but we get it this, and that's how a lot of the money was made. Now it's almost like we see a lot of the not to knock the new generation of private equity folks, but there's so much reliance on third-party reports that almost the third-party consultant will will determine the outcome of a transaction. I think we've taken it to a bit of an extreme. But what we do to create that value is, again, to the extent possible, we encourage almost every one of our sell-side clients to do a quality of earnings before we take the company to market. If there are any surprises, we want to know ahead of time. We want them to do an audit. We want to make sure that their IP is really buttoned down. If they're in a consumer-oriented business, we want to make sure they're not making any claims that they cannot support so that they can get nailed in due diligence later on. So we really kind of bulletproof the business before we go to market because diligence is very, very difficult if you cannot prove your position. One of the things we do actually for many of our clients is we have a separate buy-side group inside Intrepid. This is a search team. It's not an advisory team. We do buy-side advisory through our M&A bankers. But oftentimes we identify potential targets for the client, so that as part of their growth strategy, we can articulate an acquisition strategy for them. It's very powerful to go into a process and say, here's 15, 20 targets that we've identified. I mean, Trey, if you're buying a company, and you notice that they already have 10 acquisition targets lined up, you tend to get more excited about that, right? That's what we do. We go in the process already with that teed up. And I tell you, sponsors love that because already you're telling them, here's $10 million of incremental EBITDA that you can execute on in the first year. So we prepare that way ahead of time. So in terms of innovation, just use third-party consultants to, within reason, to validate what you're going to tell them, and then paint the picture of how this company is going to be bigger and better than it is today, but give them a credible roadmap to get to execute. Yeah.
And completely agree, Ed. We are big believers in taking the time up front to prepare ahead of going to market, making sure that, as you said, it's bulletproof, right? And everything can hold up well under Andy, due diligence.
You're right, but that's tricky because as I was telling Ashton, investment bankers by their very nature tend to be very transactional. They see a target, they go, I got to sell this thing, I got to close it in 6 months, right? How many times do we tell our client, you're not ready, wait for 12 months. You got to get your stuff together. And we do that because, I was telling Ashton the story, but there was a omni-channel retailer that approached us 3 years ago, and we basically told them, you're not ready. you got to clean. We gave him a list of things to clean up. In 12 months, he stayed off the market. He cleaned it up and did a very successful transaction. But he had to work on his brand, on some of the agreements that he used. He was in the franchising business as well. So there's a lot of cleanup to do to get it right. And a lot of bankers, don't do that. They go like, hey, let's go to market. We got a live one here. Let's just go take it to market and close the thing.
I could not agree more with you. We've done 8 deals this year, or we'll do 8 deals this year. We probably should have done 14. We've had more in LOI that ultimately fall apart, and they always fall apart for 2 areas. They didn't do their diligence on the Q of E, and then Q of E comes in $1 million lower than what it should have been, or multiple $1 million, and it's basically whether you're going to retrade or not retrade on it. And the second thing is the legal side. They don't run the traps on the legal side, and we get in there and it basically falls apart at the last minute because they can't get all the way through it. And it's very frustrating when you go through and you look at a sim and it says one thing, then you go to the diligence and it doesn't agree to you. And it's a big concern for us as well.
Well, and in a market where the valuations are so stretched for quality targets, it's particularly vulnerable to retrades, right? I mean, it doesn't take much to derail a buyer and say, I was bidding 12 times, it's not worth 12 times with all the warts that I've discovered in due diligence. Now you got to bust the process. And frankly, bankers are largely responsible for that because they overstretch the expectations of the client, right? There's the rubber band is stretched, so there's no room for surprises. And then what happens, a lot of sponsors come into the process anxious to get into a management presentation. They bid prices that they know they're not going to deliver on, and they retrade. So part of the job of the banker is to read the tea leaves. Don't just let everybody who says, I'm willing to bid 15 times, is that real? Because now you set expectations for the client, and when all the final bids come in at 11, it's a huge disappointment. Instead of saying, 11 times is a great price, we should take it, you go like, no, I had 15 on the table. No, that wasn't real to begin with. So it's a little bit of expectation management.
Yeah, for sure. Really good insight. Agree with all that. And it is interesting how when you get into diligence, if there's one issue that comes up, it makes people question a lot of other things, right? When they really don't need to. And so you do have to be very diligent about making sure that you proactively prepare ahead of time to prevent that.
Even on legal, you need to think through how to message issues if you identify them, right? The points about it's great to hear that you're saying do a legal audit beforehand, because a lot of times nothing's done and maybe a data room's prepared and it does not have 75% of the stuff that will be asked. So make sure that you have a pre-side, sell side legal diligence done. Make sure if you find issues that you think are not material, but the buyer will focus in on, understand it 100% and how to message it so that you don't get bogged down something later on and turn a 30-day process into a 60 to 90-day process. That's what we see a lot. And it's been, like you said, this more recent period, people are not looking past issues. They're seeing it and they're delving deeply because they know there aren't other buyers to come get it. I feel like every other deal I have now, they start off in exclusivity. And I was telling you beforehand, if I'm on buy side, the client will be close to exclusivity. They've identified some issues. I say, do you guys want to extend it? And they just say, you know what, we're not even going to ask because we know they're not going to find anybody else who can do the deal. And so they just go naked as a buyer, which nobody would have done a couple of years ago. And they still close. And because they know there's nobody else. And unfortunately, the sell side wasn't organized, and what they thought would be 30 days turned into, hopefully not longer, that much longer, but long enough that people get frustrated because the work wasn't done ahead of time.
And it covers a couple of areas, and we were just talking a little bit about it. When we see it on our side, and that happens multiple times, you start to see it and you see a little bit, there's a yellow flag, then there's another yellow flag. You start to question whether or not the management team, how much they really have control over their business and how much they really know, or are they hiding other things? And it goes into so much of ours is about brand reputation in the industry and what they're trying to do and how much they're going to stay and how much we can continue to grow. There's a lot of local value in some of the companies that we buy. If that starts to happen, we have to start questioning it, which then immediately starts to make us back off of whether or not we want to continue to move forward.
But in terms of best practices, Andy, we were talking a little bit before this panel discussion that we see a lot of very regimented processes where bankers don't allow the buyers to come in and ask for a lot of information, a lot of data. And we do the opposite. We like buyers to have a lot of information because then you come in with an informed bid. Why should I let the buyer find out a lot of things after exclusivity is signed? because the leverage pendulum swings in favor of the buyer, right? So it's you got to be measured about it, but we want buyers to know a lot, and frankly, we prepare the management teams. But one of the things that we like to do is allow the chemistry to develop directly between buyer and seller. It's really important because ultimately it's all about the trust that they develop in each other, and there will be a time in the process where that surprise is going to come up, and you want the relationship between the buyer and the seller to have developed enough to where the seller calls directly the buyer and says, this is what's going on, and this is what I need you guys to do. I want to do the deal with you, but then the credibility is established. If you just hide behind the investment banker wall all the time, that's a problem. You can't have that conversation. So it is important to stage it properly, but allow a little bit of the chemistry to develop directly.
I completely agree, and definitely agree with you on the data as well. We're big believers in doing a lot of work up front on data and proactively providing the data, to your point, so that people have eyes wide open about the company and performance, and they're not inclined to retrade later because they have had good information throughout. It increases certainty, and it allows values to hold up throughout a process.
It allows them to see business continuity too. The one thing that we try to do on the legal side is think through how does like a relationship or whether it's an employee or a supplier or a customer factor into post-closing. And if you can like create all that information in a manner that can be digested, it really gives the buyer a lot more, I mean, it helps them visualize, right? And use that 100-day period really effectively rather than, you can start the cleanup beforehand rather than just losing time. So it's really, we view that as a big point, as a big value add for legal, is to help visualize some of that legal stuff, like legal contractual or employee-based things to help you guys maximize value after.
Ideally, you bring Ashton and you bring Mark way before the process. To value creation, that's what it creates, right before. The value, the brand development happens way before. I think everybody rushes in the last minute to do everything, and that's not the ideal
Yeah,
process.
and I think there's just the ways to be able to look at overall and evaluate brand reputation too. So when you're going through and you're doing a brand equity audit is what we call it, but we're really looking at anything from, okay, you don't want to buy a company that has a tarnished brand that you haven't uncovered. So what are you going to do in that potential year up leading up to go into market to be able to not only squash that, but then to be able to take it on the other side and elevate the brand? What kind of PR do you need to do around it? What kind of community involvement? What kind of ways do you need to be able to elevate the brand so that you end up getting the multiple you're looking for?
And Ashton, you might touch on one more innovative tool that I think is more recent. I agree with Ed that M&A is not the most innovative space, but the videos that you produce for processes from a marketing perspective, we find them to be highly valuable. We use them on a lot of our processes now, so you may touch on what you do there and the value that you add there.
Sure. So we have partners like Black Arch where we really have the opportunity to work with very innovative thinkers in the way that we approach our work. We get to partner with, firms like y'all where we go through and we're looking at, okay, so we have this investment thesis. We usually get to see it in draft 1 or 2. And we're looking at, okay, how can we actually take what's here in this 60-page document? How can we shrink it into 3 minutes? How can we be able to create a teaser that would go out? And you could talk about when you actually are utilizing it, because based off of different teams we worked with, they're using it at various times in their process. Yeah. But if it goes out as a teaser before you actually get the SIP, and if you're looking at, okay, so we do management interviews, if management is going to be a part of the sale and they're going to be one of the key differentiators, we do management interviews, we get them on camera, we are able to showcase whether or not they're going to be somebody you actually want to do a deal with. Big deal. And then whether or not you have facilities that are local or you need to be able to show facilities that are across the world. We can go and be able to get that footage from all over so you can have an at-a-glance look at, here is what this company all has to offer. Here is the depth and breadth of their operation. And then really highlighting, I think the unique piece of it is you have the words come off the page and you're able to tell a full story, a comprehensive story about the company, in addition to being able to have every detail about the company that you want, that you all put together. So we have that tie back to, and this impacts your life because of. So you have that full circle. Here's why the investment is a good deal. Here is what you're going to expect from management. Here is what you are going to experience when you walk their floor. And this is why it actually impacts the people that you're sitting next to.
Completely agree. It's a great way to control the narrative from the beginning around the company, provide a good overview of the business, the value proposition, get exposure to the management team in a way that's efficient for them. Like you said, completely agree.
Yeah, and I think controlling the narrative is really something that's so powerful and sometimes isn't taken as highly as it could be, is being able to craft it and then reaffirm it over and over again, because you know the message and you know what you want to have being internally owned and then externally promoted.
Yeah, completely agree. Mark, welcome you to chime in here just on getting companies ready for a sale process, what your team does in that regard, and maybe what more broadly Forvis Mazars, obviously you have a lot of tools at your exposure, what you do to make sure that a lot of the prep work that we're talking about is done before companies go to market.
Yeah, I mean, our focus really is on operationalizing vision and strategy. So, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And we think that way in terms of exit because the exit, in my mind, at least from a strategy standpoint, starts when the acquisition is made. And if we don't, if the folks in the organization aren't aligned and working on the things that drive us toward the vision, that's going to show up to a buyer. If our systems and platforms aren't scalable, they can't take on more business, more acquisitions, that's going to show up to a buyer. And that the value creation roadmap is really a living, breathing document. We talk about 90-day plans of this burst of activity when we buy a company and all the things we're going to do. Well, that should never end. You should always be able to point to a buyer. These are the things we're doing well. These are the things we're struggling with, and these are the things we're doing to overcome that. And our coaching is you should be ready for sale at any given time and act accordingly. And so really, where are my gaps in people? Where are my gaps in process? Where are my gaps in technology? What's the roadmap that I specifically assign resources to address? And I should be able to point to a buyer at any given time the deficiencies that exist in the business, but also what I'm doing about it.
And Brett, you touched on this a little bit already, but as we think about from a legal perspective, helping companies get ready for a sale, where do you dig in the most, and maybe what are some of the areas that you find get the most scrutiny as companies are in market?
Right. I think you've touched on a number of things. I mean, it depends on the industry. Compliance is huge. And almost every business now has a privacy issue or a privacy component that they need to comply with. When it comes to prepping a company, getting a QOV is actually really helpful to the lawyer because then I can read and figure out, well, what's the buyer going to focus on? That's the first document I run to as a sell-side lawyer and even a buy-side lawyer. And then any third-party advisor report I read to understand what the buyer is going to focus on, because the buyers do rely on a lot of these like third-party advisors, and sometimes it harms the messaging, sometimes you end up losing the message you've created if there's too much reliance on third-party advisors. Some of them aren't always focused on context, right? So what we try to do to prepare a seller is to do some legal diligence, I try to think about business continuity. Is this a business that's that really relies on the work of employees? Is it a business that relies on the strength of their contracts? Is it a business that relies on strength of IP? And depending upon what that is, and you really focus on, that's where the buyer is going to hopefully focus. At least that's where they should spend their time focusing. And then you get ahead of whatever issues might be addressed. We had a deal that we did in the last year where you'll see earnouts are really popular right now, right? And part of the issue we had was a lot of the employees of this business are really important, and they had an LTIP. They were going to all basically be cashed out if you did the typical thing. but that meant that the earnout probably wasn't going to be people weren't as incentivized to reach the earnout. So what we tried to do was say, all right, well, we're going to structure the LTIP participation for the sale such that these LTIP holders, instead of being completely cashed out, they basically are going to participate in the earnout. So that way they're going to help the sellers maximize value, be incentivized to maintain business continuity, not leave, because that's going to hurt the buyer a lot, and hopefully it works out that well. If it's a carve out, those are also things we're seeing a ton, whether it is strategic or PE players. And on the legal side, that's when we really try to jump in with the integrators to make sure we understand, is back office going to come along? And if not, what do you need? Because you can't buy a business if you don't have the back office or if you're not ready for the transition. So those are things we really kind of focus on in those sort of like two very prevalent areas, whether it's the IT back office or contracts. Sometimes if it's a contract-based business, they might have two different business lines under the same contract. Well, how do you separate the two in an efficient way and make sure the buyer who's buying just a portion of the business gets the benefit of those contracts? And so we work through that. And it ultimately just comes down to, I think like investment bankers are really helpful for the process, but I love the fact that you said we really need the parties to discuss, because what I find a lot of times as the lawyer is I'm telling a client, have you just talked to the buyer directly? Or are you only going through your investment banker? Because if you're only going through the investment banker, you're building no real credibility. And if that's the case, you're also using a middleman who has a lot of like good information on the transaction, but may not know what's needed for the post-closing like operational transition. And so you really need to like actually develop real relationships. And that's always a big thing we try to push on. And sometimes the client isn't comfortable with it because they think, I've hired somebody to help, and if I say something that screws it up, well, then I should have just used my investment banker. And the reality is, like, the banker is there to help facilitate. If you want to have a pre-conversation on how to message it, that's huge. But like actually getting people in the room to talk about integration early on is really important, I think. So
you raise a good point about carve-outs. We're working on a deal now that the commercial assumptions are 100% dependent upon a third-party manufacturer in the UK, distributors in EMEA and Australia, and ensuring that those suppliers are going to come, culturally, financially, in the way we're assuming is a huge part of the deal. And so the legal diligence and getting to know the relationships that are there are all going to be critical to whether that deal is successful or not from a revenue standpoint.
Sounds like an easy deal to get done in this environment. Trey, you touched earlier on some of the things that you look for that are kind of gating items when you look at acquisition targets. Is there anything that sell-side advisors, bankers, or other advisors do to make your life easier? That might be a nice way to get you into this conversation. Or are there things that we can all be mindful of that are not helpful?
I love Brett's comments because around the legal side and the Q of E, you can tell when those two parties don't talk. And it really shows up. And when those narratives are different, that is an immediate flag from a buyer standpoint of like, is there something here that I may not know about, or is there something here that I need to look a little bit deeper on? And that starts to flag up for us. A lot of it, and we kind of talked a little bit on this, is around the data side. The sim tells you a lot of stuff of whether or not you're really kind of, am I going to be interested or not? But the data side of the equation provides a lot to us around kind of how do we think about those next, what is the next kind of 100 days, 1 year, 2 year look like? What do I need to focus on? Where do I need to focus my attention to? We love seeing a lot of that stuff because there are things where, there's always warts in every single deal that gets done. It's about whether or not the data ultimately, are there things that we can find that ultimately get us around it? So there's some other areas where there might be some additional value creation that we may not have seen originally, but we may find in some of the data, because we're looking not just for what are they worth today, we're really looking at what can we do, how do we connect, looking at the customer information. So seeing a lot of that type of stuff really helps. We love seeing, and I'm majorly focused now with the kind of the the interest rate environment doing what it's done over the last probably 2 years, cash flow management. It's amazing how many QOVs I get a hold of where they're not doing kind of a full cash flow understanding and kind of providing all of the bank reconciliations that go along with it. I mean, we do a lot of little deals and they don't do that type of stuff, and you find them. Inventory management, things of that nature. It's a lot of little things out there that can really add value or create new questions for us to be able to go through and ask associated with it. We're in a fairly regulated environment, and we want to understand from like union, non-union, technicians, kind of like how are you thinking about it? What does your customer profile look like? How much concentration do you have inclusive inside of there? How good are you at collecting your AR? Those are the type of things that like you start to see and you're like, wow, they really understand their business. They know how to operate their business. They know what the drivers are attached to it on the back end. It gives us comfortability. How well their systems are built, things of that nature. Those are areas where really like those can add value to the conversation. It can really help us understand, is this somebody who's going to be able to partner with, to be able to help us get through our integration strategy, help us really continue to grow? Are they going to be willing to partner and kind of work with the rest of our portfolio? How do they ultimately all of that come together as part of it? Those are all things that we think about on a regular basis as we're going through it.
And Brett, maybe just two more topics we'll cover here, one of them coming to you. I think everybody probably has the regulatory environment top of mind right now. Any perspectives you could share about what to expect going forward here?
So there's two different areas, right? Or not two different, but two different levels of regulation. There's federal and there's state. Federal gets all the headlines. Everybody's worried about antitrust and what the FTC is going to do. And you saw, DOJ just told Google they're going to have to get rid of Chrome. I think big tech is going to be super focused no matter what. The regulators will be focused on that. They're going to be focused on pharma. My hope is that middle market, kind of everybody understands that these are where real jobs are created a lot, and it's a dynamic market, and so I don't think there will be quite as much focus. The only problem with that is the current administration has issued new rules around HSR filings, which are basically just the filing that you make after you sign a deal above $100 million enterprise value. And you have to basically declare yourself to the FTC and the DOJ. And they've now basically imposed much more information requirements that we're seeing might add 5 or 6 times the amount of man hours to get done. Okay, so typical M&A deal, if there's a delayed signing and closing, you'll say, the purchase agreement will say, within 10 days of signing, we will have filed our HSR. Okay, we're basically telling nobody to agree to that anymore because the chance of you being able to get that done in 10 days is going to be very difficult. You will need to start doing it before signing for sure, if you're going to do that. And the problem is if it's before signing, there's a lot of other stuff that's being completed at the same time. So that's one area. I think it's going to create more friction, more cost. Hopefully that might get pared back a little bit with the new administration, but you just don't know. And then I mentioned the second level is state level regulation, and you're seeing state regulators be way more active for political reasons, as well as just that they just view it as their role. And so you see California AG coming out and going after property managers about overcharging on their customer, like tenant deposits. You see a focus on like privacy compliance at the state regulatory level, because they see the federal government as not taking these actions, so the state level gets really focused on it. So we have a whole team at our firm that basically just does state AG practice, and they're super busy all the time. So those are two areas that you have to focus on. I think the state AG people don't think about it as much because it doesn't get the headlines as much, but it is going to continue to be super active, and it's not along political lines. You do tend to see like the states that are more blue to maybe have a little bit more active, but the red states are active too, and they're just active on different reasons or different areas because like anybody can get behind a lot of consumer protection a lot of times. So
will be very interesting to see how that plays out for sure. Ed, last question for you. Just market activity and outlook on next year. Would love to get your thoughts on what you're seeing now and what you expect for next year.
You want my crystal ball?
Absolutely. Let's hear it.
It changes every day.
Let's hear it.
Well,
we
listen,
may or we may not hold you to it.
Like I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you I look at the conditions that either are fruitful and encourage M&A or detract, right? And first of all, the activity level, sponsors are starting to think about selling companies increasingly. So the number of pitches are way up for us. The pipeline is improving. Frankly, a lot of sponsors kept away from going to market because their own portfolio companies were struggling. They were not in the best position to go to market. And so we've been talking to sponsors who've been telling us the companies are getting better. If they continue improving, we're going to go to market next year. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity next year, a lot of new inventory going into the market. So I'm feeling good about next year in terms of the availability of supply of taking companies to market. Also, the regulatory conditions with the new administration, we're probably going into more of a systemic deregulatory or lesser regulation mode. That should help the M&A markets. The interest rate environment is going to help. So I think all the conditions are ripe for M&A activity to rebound significantly next year. What you can't predict are those shocks that may come from left field to create uncertainty. And M&A markets don't like uncertainty. You got to be able to price risk for acquirers to be active. So that's kind of what I see. But I just wanted to add one thing that we haven't discussed, just really quick, if I may. So I do some seminars for Young Presidents Organization when we discuss with business owners what drives value in businesses. And one thing we didn't talk about, which is I think something that Ashton can probably capture in her video clips, is I put a list on a board for business owners of various attributes of a business, and I ask them to rate it from the biggest value drivers to the lowest value drivers. And we have IP, strength of management team, profit margins, growth, all of those things. And I bury a little line that says culture, corporate culture. And nobody guesses that the corporate culture is the biggest value driver or detractor. And the reason I bring that up is that it is the hardest attribute to build in a business and is the hardest attribute for a strategic to duplicate. They have to acquire it. And Trey can probably say, if you buy a company whose culture clashes with your culture, you're going to have a tough time integrating that. And if you buy something with compatible values and culture, it's just a beautiful thing, right? And the reason I'm saying that is that we ask our clients to focus on making that culture come alive in processes, highlight that. And that's, when you do a good job articulating what that culture is about, that's the secret sauce, the DNA that buyers are going to have to pay a lot of money to buy because they can't duplicate it themselves. So something to keep in mind.
Well said.
Yeah.
I think we've run out of time to do closing remarks, but maybe I'll just make one comment and then we want to open it up for Q&A and answer any questions that the audience has. But as we think about the current state of the M&A market in general, given some recent volatility, uncertainty, as well as cost of capital being elevated, it has become a little more challenging to get deals done. There's greater scrutiny across the board in due diligence. People are a little bit more skeptical. Their underwriting requires more scrutiny, right? So a lot of what we've talked about today are ways in which we can all be thoughtful about making sure that certainty is first and foremost in people's minds. So you're doing the upfront prep work ahead of going to market, making sure that you're positioning companies appropriately, and not only you're able to close them, but you're able to close them for maximum value. So all of that is incredibly important, and people like we have on the panel today are constantly working together to drive value. So thanks again, everybody, for your time today. We'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Most of my clients, sell-side advisor, kind of doing what Ed does, but we live off the crumbs of Ed and Black Arch here. But so our owners are typically founder-led businesses, family-owned businesses, partner-owned businesses. They can be reluctant to spend a lot of money up front. So for anybody on the panel, what have you seen for smaller M&A advisors? What kind of innovative strategies have they used to maybe address some of these issues prior to going to market?
Mark, do you want to start with that, and then maybe Ed can chime in too?
I'll go to Ed. I don't do a ton of sell-side prep.
I mean, look, you got to pick your spots. Like what third-party advisor do you need? What kind of report? And if you're going to spend the money one place, I'd probably put it on the QOV, because the smaller the company, the more likely you're going to have a challenge in due diligence. There are providers who will do it pretty effectively. I think there's some. You should talk to Daniel, right, sitting there. He's got a firm that does QOVs, so yeah, you could find somebody who'll do it for an affordable price, and that's where I would put my money.
I would totally say that too, because even as a non-accountant, right, like the QOV is so helpful, big picture. And most of your buyers, the company that they're buying, it may or may not be super material to them, as far as like the size. So doing a ton of pre-legal work that just delves everywhere is not going to be effective, because any legal issue that comes out of it's probably not going to be, it's probably within a line item the buyer has, right? But what they're going to focus on are the financials and how they think they can multiply it. And so, like, I just think the only thing I ever see if it's pre-done would be a QOV.
Yeah, 100% on our side too. So when we see it, I'd much rather you focus your attention on the QOV, have a really good QOV that's kind of dialed in, where there's not going to be a ton of questions on the back end of that. The cleaner that QOV is, the better that all the rest of the stuff. If a legal issue does show up, it's much more easier to work through, knowing that we've got a pretty good QOV that kind of feels grounded.
The good news is I'm part of a larger accounting firm, so I have some of those resources.
That's right. I would add just 2 quick points there, Gary. One is it is nice that there are providers at different price points, so you have a good menu to provide to your clients. The other thing too is I think it's incumbent upon us as advisors sometimes to really take a stand and say, I have seen multiple times in my career where you did not spend the money up front and it cost you much more money, sometimes multiples of that money on the back end, right? And that's where you've got to have that trust with your client and advise them and hold your ground, I think, personally.
Like Ed said, you got to manage all those surprises. There's always a surprise.
I would say from a brand perspective too, even just cleaning up the overall narrative too, to make sure that they have a very clear value prop. So even just taking the messaging and being able to dial it in and checkpointing where and how many different voices are out there about that company, and then dial it in and be able to have one solid message that's going to be able to take you forward. We see very discrepant messaging a lot, and a lot of times it's really helpful to be able to dial that in and clarify.
My name is Samantha. I own a video production and communications agency. I was curious, Ed, earlier you mentioned that the greatest innovation in 30 years has been virtual data rooms. Can you guys speak to some of the changing technology that you're seeing as part of the deal process? And if you're not seeing technology changing significantly, what are some of the problems that you're seeing out there that technology could help address?
Crete, we're 47 companies in. We actually have a video production crew on house. So we brought it all internal because we were farming it out. And as we were doing that, we were learning that this is something that we wanted and we needed on a regular basis. We found a ton of value of being able to go back to our national customers, even to some of the regional customers, and really be able to tell our story in the right way. It's really tough when you're doing as much as we're doing to be able to get our management team in front of people, but it's very easy to have a production that's readily available to say, hey, listen, take a look at this, have a conversation, we can have a conversation afterward, and we can do it over different areas. It's now in the environment, we're seeing more, we've got social media people now that we have on staff. We have marketing people that are focused on all types of things, from just kind of like focus back on the management team to focusing on the industry and what's happening in the industry. We've seen a lot of kind of more push in that direction because it just helps us get integrated, or kind of gets us a foothold into a lot of our customers.
We also see, rep and warranty insurance, people might not think of that as technology, but that is kind of like deal technology in a way. That's changed a lot of the negotiation around indemnities and all of that. It has unfortunately had people end up relying on advisors a lot more and acting less instinctual, and it does kind of take out the ability to make judgment calls, because if you haven't diligenced an issue, it just basically gets excluded from coverage. But that's one thing. The legal side, where people are trying to figure out what to do with AI and how to analyze some of the information. I think numbers, probably it's a little bit easier, and that's further along. Legal will be there eventually. It's just not there quite yet. I don't think it's going to ever, for any of these functions, you're never going to replace the individuals, with the like instinctual and judgment experience, judgment-based experience?
Yeah, so we're starting to invest resources with firms helping us with the AI component when it comes to acquire identification. Find potential acquirers that are not the obvious ones that you'll get from a Cap like or a pitch book or your own resources or prior processes or your own research. There's some pretty sophisticated tools that are being developed to access some out-of-the-box potential acquirers. That's why I think a lot of the effort's going to go on AI. Also gathering information quickly and getting smart. In an industry sector, they would have taken a lot longer to get really, really smart to understand the value drivers. That's where I think a lot of technology money is going to go.
The social media piece also incredibly helps us with hiring in general, from just putting our name out there and being able to find technicians to finding like just generally analysts in the environment that we're in. They're going more to social media, more so than they've ever have in the previous periods, and we find a lot of them are actually coming on there like, how did you know about us? And they're like, well, I looked you up and then I started following your social media. And that was a very quickly, wow, okay, they actually are really paying attention to what we're doing, what we're committing back to the community, things of that nature really shows up well there.
Yeah, and a lot of times though, we work with various companies too where it's the employer marketing piece. Right. So you have the company marketing, but you actually have the employer marketing. So you're telling the stories of everyone who works there, why it's a great culture, you're highlighting the culture, you're showing videos of culture pieces and culture drivers that are really the game changer to being able to make sure that you're continuing to develop the right kind of personnel on your team. And then AI, for sure. All aspects of AI, making sure that you're validating and then also using it as responsibly as possible.
Brett, it's a great point about rep and warranty insurance, though. That's probably the most transformative development over the course of my career. Very nice tool to have in the quiver, for sure.
Hello, good morning. My name's Chris. I'm an operator of a private equity-backed platform company. I think it's interesting, Brett, you talked about, Troutman was part of a longer name, Pepper was part of a longer name, and we struggle with, acquisitions, and certainly not at the velocity that you're doing them, Trey, but to keep bolting on these company names, which turn into brands, and if there's any unique process that you've ever identified to create value, right, value creation in the absence of data, of what a brand then becomes. We struggle with that all the time, and I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but picking up guidance.
I'll tell you what our marketing team seems to have done. All of our swag now says Troutman.com instead of Troutman Pepper or Troutman Pepper Lords, so maybe they're kind of slowly phasing it and they'll maintain brand and eventually keep it and it'll just be Troutman, but it's hard. Managing that is I don't know what to do in there and I don't get hired for it. Definitely Ashton's role.
Sure. So a lot of times we're looking at evaluating which companies host the most brand equity and be able to pull from it. So you're looking at, okay, so you have, company A, company B, company C, and which one provides what for each other? How can you either combine the names in order to be able to keep the equity of all of them and combine them, or looking at what you can roll in because it actually doesn't matter, but making sure that you're doing it in a span of time that makes sense to be able to inform, also creating the narrative behind it to let customers know, don't have any surprises for your customers, any of your current employees. Make sure that you have the retention of the employees when a new acquisition gets bolted on too, because they could be worried that they're going to lose their jobs. So keeping messaging at the core and then making sure that the rollout and the combination of the two with a new brand story attached to it as to the why has proven to be beneficial.
Or you could do what, I'm going to tell you an old man story. About 20 years ago, we had one of these ACG events and people were asking Edge Private Equity, representative would come up and say why they're so different and special than everybody else. And one guy stands up and he says, we're different from everybody else. We overpay and we do no due diligence. And everybody wanted to sell to that guy. So you may want to use that line to be attractive to that's good.
All right, well, thanks again to all of our panelists. Really good discussion. Appreciate the time.